Buenas noches, everybody. I'm Antonio Campos Guzman, and please, some of you hold your laughter. I am the chair of the Department of Theater, officially as this year. Please hold your laughter. It's been a ride, as you can possibly imagine, but it's wonderful to welcome so many of you back to your alma mater for this wonderful celebration of the work of our students doing Metamorphoses and a conversation with our dear alum Pablo, and also a conversation with our dear friend and colleague, Nancy Kindelan. So I just want to acknowledge that I am zooming in from the ancestral lands on the Wampanoag, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket peoples, also known as Jamaica Plain. And we, Northeastern, is situated on those ancestral lands as well. And that's where we conduct our business and our work and our art. So welcome and thank you for joining us, especially for those of you who didn't have the pleasure or the pain of having me as your teacher. It's nice to see you, nice to meet you, and welcome. I want to give a special thanks to the alumni office, to Christopher Kelly, to Molly Herman, particularly to Diana Brunchuk, who she has organized this event and all the streaming of our productions this semester. Diana, thank you so much. And also a big shout out to our operations manager, Marty McIntosh, and our production coordinator, Herbert Moore, who is over there. Oh my God, Hannah Grant Tertzakis, gee, and Michael Underhill in graduate school. This is kind of ridiculous. So without further ado, we thought that we wanted to share with you what it is that we're doing in response to the pandemic in terms of theater. And by pandemic, I don't only mean the COVID pandemic, but as many of you know, the world of professional theater has been in this incredible wave of change towards a more socially and racial justice work that we need to do in the professional world of theater. And of course, in the work of the Academy in theater. So who best to lead us in this conversation than our dear Dr. Nancy Kindelan, Professor Emerita of our esteemed department. So without further ado, it is my pleasure and honor to cede the speaking to Nancy.
Thank you, Antonio. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's just really exciting for me to reconnect. I don't have your pictures up because I'm trying to manage looking at my screen and asking questions. And I'm afraid if I saw pictures up there, I'd get wanting to get into discussions with people that I saw and haven't seen for such a long time. At any rate, eventually I will turn on your pictures and it will be great to see all of you. Tonight, we're going to take a look at resilience, especially as it relates to the world of theater. And for those of you who know me, know that in getting ready for this, I dug into my files in numerous ways, and I came across this quote from John Steinbeck that I wanted to share with you. And he says, the theater is the only institution in the world which has been dying for 4,000 years and has never succumbed. It requires tough and devoted people to keep it alive. Resiliency is no stranger to theater. Throughout history, from the Greeks to the present day, theater had to learn how to be flexible, strong, tough, adaptable. Its workers, the people who work in the theater and practice theater, had to learn how to recover quickly when faced with all sorts of challenges, whether they be religious, political censorship, financial instability, social injustices, gender inequality, and epidemics. When thinking about all of these roadblocks, it's easy to say, why bother? Studying theater history and working as a theater practitioner and engaging in the world of academic theater has taught me a great deal about the importance of resiliency. Social, political, and health challenges speaks to a synonym for resiliency, strength of character. And I say it is strength of character that is a necessary ingredient for creating anything. An artistic idea, a new play, production, an innovative form of theater, especially if drama and theater seek ways to help society become better. Tonight we'll be hearing from NU students, a current undergraduate a soon-to-be graduate and a somewhat recent graduate who know the importance of a backbone, strength of character. So I'd like to begin with Pablo. Hello, Pablo. My face went away. I don't know.
Hi, Nancy. I'm here. Don't worry. I'm right here.
Just a little history here. Pablo and I had a great talk a couple of days ago. My first encounter with Pablo was in 2013 when he emailed the theater department's then interim chair, and that happened to be me, asking about what kind of theater education he could expect at Northeastern. That initial question resulted into a series of emails, a number of emails, and I still have them, and I reread them. And so I want to ask Pablo, as you searched for a theater department, because you were doing that, you were looking at a number of departments across the United States. Can you tell us what you were looking for and if it met your expectations?
It met my expectations. It's so incredibly tough, the choice, that we put in the shoulders of someone leaving high school. I was 19 at the time, and I knew so little about theater when looking back. But I was looking for a place where I knew that theater was much more than just performance and just acting. And I was looking for a place where I could trust that I could find my way to make connections between theater and other fields. And I definitely met that expectation, for sure. It definitely was a place where I could continue to embrace my curiosity for theater beyond entertainment. So yes, it did do that.
Fantastic. I had a lot of experiences with Pablo while he was here, and it was very clear to me from those emails and then on our conversations after that, and in the work that you did, that you were really a good example of someone who was very intentional in what it was that they were pursuing. I soon found out that that intentionality was combined with a great deal of passion. You were looking for ways to use theater to become socially responsible. You weren't sure exactly what that was then. So talk a little bit about that journey and why you took that journey from the moment that you entered Northeastern.
I think that it's tough to not color my journey with what I know now. But I was very curious and truly trying to listen to myself in my curiosity towards theater, feeling relevant to social change. And the big shift on that for me was encountering Theater of the Oppressed, created by Brazilian artist Augusto Boal. That was the year before I left for college, and that really switched my whole search of colleges. I was looking for musical theater conservatories, and after I encountered Theater of the Oppressed, I really switched towards an opportunity to keep expanding on the idea of theater for social change. And I really continued on that curiosity, arriving at Northeastern, and just poking at the idea that not only the content of a play could be about social change, because there are many plays about social change, but that also how that play was presented, in the format of it, where it was presented, who presented it, the institution that created it in the first place. All of those things were also tied to social change. And even further now in my career, and I think in my last few years at Northeastern, questioning more, well, what is theater? What do we consider theater? And why must it be these institutions? How can we also expand? If theater is about gathering and telling stories, what are other ways in which we gather and tell stories that are not under the strict confinement of what we think of theater, but actually still serves the same purpose. And Nancy and I were talking about this in our preparation for this call, but it truly, in the journey of Northeastern, I thought a lot about how theater as an art form is uniquely positioned to engage with community, because you can watch the exact same movie in your home, in a movie theater, in any part of the world. It's the same piece of art. But theater is all about the people in the room together in that moment, and in space, well, in virtual space, even if in these cases. And it's such a prime matter as an artist to consider community in that moment. And so much theater is made as if it was just consumed without any preoccupation for who's on the other side. And I'm a fan of theater that acknowledges who is receiving the story, who is there together, and how are we building community.
Well, there's the passion and the questioning and the continual digging to try to put that all together. So the next thing that I wrote, you've already covered some of this, but I really want to, bring it back again and have you maybe go a little bit deeper. So I wrote, your academic, artistic, co-op, leadership, speaking accomplishments are numerous. And
thank you, Nancy.
I wish I had time to go through all of them with everybody tonight, but we don't. So just trust me, they're noteworthy and numerous. You participated in international projects in London and in Brazil. You had an opportunity to work on American Repertory Theater's highly acclaimed Anna Deavere Smith's Notes from the Field project. And for those of you who know me out there and have taken classes with me, you know that how much I respect Anna Deavere Smith's work. So to send Pablo over to ART and have him have that experience of working with her was extraordinary. And I know that while you were at ART, you also worked in the area of education, community engagement, and marketing. So it's circling back again to community engagement. And it's now starting to pick up on the idea of how to get that idea out, marketing. So here's my question. You've had a lot of experiences. You've had a lot of Northeastern University courses. You've done a fair amount of theater activities. You've had incredible co-op experience, and you had a wonderful capstone directing project. How did all of those things that you experienced at Northeastern start to help you achieve some of your goals? You can just pick one of your goals, and I heard community said over and over again. Maybe you want to go in that direction.
That's a good question. Achieve my goals. I think that the pattern that I see in these opportunities, and I've mentioned this to people in this call, was I'm really thankful that I was committed to the next question, the next burning question in my mind, and just trying to dive as deep as I could to that next question so that it would inspire new questions. And there's a level of honesty that came with that. When I worked at ART, I was really curious as to how an institution even worked, how theater institutions operated, and I worked there for 9 months, and it was definitely a deep dive into what an institution meant. But being there, it really sparked a lot of questions of how institutions could engage in meaningful community engagement, and how artists could be at the center of making community engaged pieces of art. And then when I worked in Brazil, that was a great thing that I explored with working with a choir called With One Voice, that's composed of people experiencing homelessness. And that was another deep dive into what if I just did grassroots social work? Maybe that's what I've been searching for, and I should totally switch to social work. And while working in Brazil, I really missed some of the institutional, the breadth of change that institutions can produce because of their size. So leaving Brazil, I was really looking for a place where I could engage in meaningful community engagement while also still working within an institution that could have a larger reach than just changing individuals. So I ended up coming to work at where I'm working now at the Public Theater. And in terms of goals, I think it just evolves every 6 months, which is a beauty of Northeastern, that I could really set a new target that I was focusing on and let co-op take me to a place where my classes the next semester, I could also use every final project that I could attach to my questions, sort of to lead me to a new semester. And I remember in my final year at Northeastern, I was being interviewed for some jobs, and someone asked me how I define community. And at the time I said, well, community in theater must be about something geographic. It must be about people being near each other. And the company that was interviewing me was in San Francisco, and they said, well, our community is highly gentrified. So does that mean that as soon as someone is no longer geographically close, are they no longer part of a community? And I said, no, I guess that's wrong. And so that was a question that it left Northeastern with. And 2.5 years into my work at the Public Theater, it's been crystal clear that community is about relationships, and every theater already has a community. It's not community engagement is often a code word we like to say when we actually mean working with Black and brown people that are not typically welcome into theater spaces. But every theater, the widest of theaters, have a community. It's the people they have relationships with. And community engagement happens in marketing, it happens in development, and it happens in education. It's just about who are we making relationships with, and how can theaters, one, acknowledge that we have been secluded, trapped, and also, corrupted by white supremacy and have linked arms with elitism, and we believe we have become a luxury item that only perpetuates the same power structure. Acknowledge that that's where we are, and purposefully create new relationships to break away from that position. And that's making new relationships is making a new community. So that's really where I'm a big, I guess, success after the 5 years of Northeastern is kind of coming up with being able to say this in a sentence. And it's taken months and months of many, many questions, and it feels nice to be grounded. Truly, Northeastern was a series of questions leading to more questions, and it feels nice. What I feel like I gained from my education is a good, solid grounding on where I can stand in my conviction of my own personal thesis of why I do theater and why I'm in this field.
Where do you go with that incredible answer? I said to Pablo when I talked to him, I dug into my emails and I found a paper that he wrote when he was a first-year student in English that dealt with institutions and how the institution of Northeastern had to support theater. And so there was that little spark of connection at that particular point that I think continues to grow. And you also talked about community. And so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise to leap into this question. Pablo is now at the Public Theater in New York City. His job title is Public Works National Associate. He's had this job since 2018. In a recent email that Pablo sent me, he said, I'd like you to take a look at a documentary that was made called Under the Greenwood Tree, which detailed the making of As You Like It at the Public Theater. And he said, I worked on this project. And it's an incredible documentary, and it speaks to a great deal of what you've been talking about. Because we can't show the documentary, although I would encourage everybody to look it up and take it. It made my day. Talk about what that project was, so everybody understands what it is that the Public Theater is doing in terms of public works, and also how you've already done this to a certain extent, but maybe 3 things that you got out of Northeastern that helped you leap into that project.
Sure. So There's so many layers to understand to get to what I do, which is just the nature of working in a developing part of the field. It's not as simple as lighting designer, and then you know what that is. Public Works is a program within the public theater that is about building new relationships. We collaborate with 8 community partner organizations around the city, and we offer theater programming year-round. And we're perhaps most famous for over the summer, we make these productions with 200 people at the Delacorte Theater in Central Park. So it really began partially from questioning who does the Delacorte Theater belong to. Free Shakespeare in the Park has been around for more than 50 years. It is a big staple of New York City and the public theater, and it's also this crown jewel of Shakespeare in the world. But the idea that people from all over the city, people that have never done theater before, could also stand on that stage and also do a show was about shifting what theater is for in the first place. And the thought was, what if theater, or this one particular event, was about civic unity and seeing New York City reflected on stage, and a theater as a space of gathering and a space for a city to gather. Of course, New York is 8 million people, so it's tough to gather everyone. But the partners that we work with are meant to represent specifically the 5 boroughs of New York City. But we work with a union of domestic workers. We work with an organization that works with veterans, an organization that works with people who are formerly incarcerated, a community center that works with senior citizens. There's people from all walks of life, and everyone comes together and does a massive piece of theater. And it's truly a blast. And I really appreciate that it truly does mean a new avenue for relationships. Most theater companies, the way that you enter them are through buying a ticket or donating money, both very transactional relationships. And Public Works is a new avenue that's about you spending time with us, these community partner organizations spending time with us and making theater with us. And it's a new way that we're building relationships. And as I said, relationships is community. So 3 things Northeastern helped me to get there. Well, definitely these questions that I've been mentioning before, but my work in Northeastern definitely led me, and as I was mentioning to Nancy, to be enamored by institutions. And institutions are really messy, but it's the way we operate as humans. I don't know if anyone has read the book Sapiens, A Brief History of Humanity. It's such a good book. I'm blanking on the author's name, but he talks about what makes us unique as humans is the ability to collectively imagine structures that allow us to organize at such large numbers. And institutions are collectively imagining that allows us to organize. And institutions like the public are built under truly imaginary ideas, such as theater of, by, and for the people. And it is a far goal to achieve. And it is a dangerous banner under which to gather because it can be manipulated. But programs like Public Works and many of my coworkers are there to try to hold institutions accountable to not only use these words for us to gather around, but also to actually fulfill these goals.
Fantastic. One last thing. Everybody's going to get this question, and so it's not a total surprise because we had a little chat about this. But where do you see yourself in 5 years?
In 5 years, sorry, I needed to drink some water. I really hope to be working in more national networks like I do right now. So Nancy mentioned my title is Public Works National Associate because I help other programs around the country start their own public works programs. And so that's been a real joy. And I hope to continue in that path of finding ways to connect institutions and create programs like the Federal Theater Project that Nancy taught us about, and continue to find networks that theaters can support each other so that we could eventually, hopefully, fight the way theater is funded. 5 years, I possibly see myself in Mexico back again, trying to build a similar program to Public Works over there. But maybe still in the US, we'll see how things evolve. But I'm definitely very interested in networks of theater. That's what I hope to keep doing.
Fantastic. Well, I know we'll stay in touch, right? And I'll watch you very carefully, and you're going to bring to us exciting and deep and wonderful projects. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to switch gears now and talk. This is a different kind of story because Pablo has graduated, and the two people that are going to be talking with us now are both still at Northeastern. Des Bennett, who I call Desiree, and I've noticed that others call her Des. So you tell me what you want me to call you now, Desiree.
You can call me anything, Nancy.
Oh, Desiree, because that's my name for you. She'll graduate soon. I can't believe it. And Erin Solomon, who is not going to graduate until 23. As I mentioned earlier, we had an opportunity to have a chat, Erin and I, on the phone this afternoon because Erin, I never had Erin in a class. And so my connection to Erin is really pretty much based on that conversation that we had this afternoon. And so she'll fill us in. And I'm going to present some of these questions to both of you, and sometimes I'll present them to just one person and we'll take it from there. And also, Antonio, I want to remind you to feel free to jump in with questions for Erin, since you've worked with her a lot more than I
just want to make sure that everybody understands why we're talking to Erin and Des, because Erin is the stage manager of the production of Metamorphoses that starts tonight, and Des is a director. That's her capstone.
I was going to get there.
Okay, just make sure.
Okay. So now you know that. Desiree is a theater major and a psychology minor. And she was in several of my courses when I taught at Northeastern, Theater and Society and From Script to Stage. And it's always very interesting to me that I really can just visualize the classes that I taught and know exactly where people sat. And I certainly can, and you see me now looking away, I certainly can see Theater and Society and see Desiree, and I can see From Script to Stage and see Desiree also. One thing that I want to make really clear, that relationship really wasn't just a class relationship. It didn't begin when Desiree walked in the door and end when Desiree left the classroom. I remember distinctly long conversations in my office that revolved around theater and social change. And we would talk, and Desiree would go away, and sometimes she would come back and she'd have some book that she said, you have to read this, or I get an email. And that kind of connection, as Pablo talked about earlier, continues. I was at a conference a year ago, fall, and Desiree was at Central Square at that time, and they did a cutting of a play, Einstein's Dreams, for this conference. And there was Desiree with the cast and Deborah Wise, the artistic director, and Wes Savick, the director of the production of Einstein's Dreams. Because of her deep desire to know as much as she possibly can about theater and social change, it doesn't surprise me at all that she selected scenes from Metamorphoses to direct as a capstone project. I want to you to talk about that a little bit, your selection of that project. We had a conversation this past week that went close to an hour and a half, a catch-up conversation, where she started to weave in all of her ideas about theater, interests in theater, concerns about theater. And it was heartening to hear that kind of growth and learning is really something that all of my students seem to be very passionate about. And that's what makes them flexible and adaptable and resilient. So when I talked to Erin on the phone this afternoon, I discovered she's a theater and comm studies major with a minor in graphic design, which, by the way, Pablo also, I believe, had a minor in graphic design. I think that's a very interesting combination. So that's my introduction to both of these people, short, just so we can get to them as soon as possible. So I'd like to ask, and I'll start with Des, I'd like to ask what brought you to Northeastern and why you chose to study theater.
Hi. So I had a deep interest in Boston as one of the kind of alternative locations for theater on the East Coast, and also one of the few theater departments which actually encourage interdisciplinary learning. One of the things that I ran into while applying for colleges and interviewing at colleges was, many learning institutions are conservatories, and they want you to focus only on your theater work, often only in one specific field within theater. And being someone who has always been kind of inclined to the sciences, to the social sciences, to social issues, that wasn't going to work for me. And to be fair, I think I also wasn't completely sold at the time that theater was something that I loved, that theater was something that I was good at, that theater was something that I could be successful in. And I think that, interestingly, maybe I had a premonition that the interdisciplinary nature of this kind of learning style would become incredibly helpful in a time like this. And coming to Northeastern, and the first time I came to Northeastern, I remember I was with my parents and they hated it. And they walked through this campus and said, "This is not it. This is not the place. We need to go home. It's an institution." And that was very scary for them. But there was something about that day, and I think I remember meeting Pablo that day, and kind of feeling like, yes, this is it. And what I learned being here is that the interdisciplinary nature of Northeastern as a whole really runs true throughout the department as well. I mean, we train all of our actors to also know how to do lights and know how to program a soundboard and run a board during a show, and all of these kind of behind the scene things that oftentimes in conservatories we don't get to learn about, or our interests are at least very funneled. So to make that major specific, and then also connect our major and our passions to other things within the world, the sciences, computer science, etc., really, to me, presented a huge opportunity in order to be able to touch people from different experiences, people from different backgrounds, which kind of goes into what Pablo was talking about, community building. I mean, we can't just think about our community as artists and theater makers, but our community as theater makers is everyone, or at least it should be. So that was definitely vital for me in coming to Northeastern.
Great. There's just so much to talk about, so little time. So why did you want to study theater?
I originally, before I found theater in high school, and I found theater kind of late in high school, and and that came to that confusion about whether the arts was something that I should dive into head first. But I was really certain that I was interested in psychology, and the reason for that being that I I wanted to know what made people think, how we organize ideas in our minds, how we organize things as a society. And that's what kind of led me to know for sure that theater was where I could continue to learn about those things. And also I've always been a visual artist. I've always been a person who was always painting and drawing and doodling. And so to interweave kind of the humanities in that way was really what drew me to theater.
I want to ask Erin that same question. What brought you to Northeastern, and why did you choose to study theater? Erin, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Erin. Erin has a face. I just heard the voice today.
It's very nice to meet you face to face now, Nancy. I applied to Northeastern knowing that my sister had applied to Northeastern about 5 years earlier, and she had stayed in the Boston area for college as well. And upon visiting her a couple of different times, I had the same interest that she did in the city. And so once I kind of got to that college application process, the only school in Boston that really piqued my interest was Northeastern. So when I came one summer and toured the campus with my sister, and throughout that tour, she was very critical, just because she had had her own experience in the Boston area at Emerson College, and she was like, and then we went on the tour at Emerson that afternoon, and I was just like, no, Northeastern is it, and it kind of remained my top choice for the rest of my college application process. And what really drew me to Northeastern was, of course, the opportunities to study abroad as well as co-op, and I was very, very interested in the idea of a combined major. And every other school that I applied to, I had actually applied to their journalism program, which I find to be very interesting now looking back, because that is not something that I would pursue three years later. But theater has just always been a part of my life. I can't think of a time in the past 20 years that I haven't been working on a production. And so it just kind of felt like a very natural fit. And I don't know why I had considered studying anything else as I was applying to schools. So yeah.
Great. This is a combined question again. And I found out that both Desiree and Erin completed co-ops at Central Square Theater. And when I hear a little bit more about that experience, so let's start with, what was the focus of your co-op experience at Central Square? And I'll start with Des, and talk a little bit about what you did at Central Square in your co-op, and a little bit about the projects that you worked on in Central Square. And then we'll segue into Metamorphoses. So Des, where did you go?
So I was an intern under the artistic director, Deborah Wise. She's the artistic director for Underground Railway Theater, which is dedicated to social change and representation of BIPOC folks in the theater that they do. And Central Square Theater also has a kind of combined initiative called Catalyst Collaborative, which is in partnership with MIT, and it's their program which aims to produce works that are at the intersection between theater and science and technology. So I went in really, really curious about that. I think that right before I had gotten my internship there, I had seen Frankenstein, and if anyone else saw Frankenstein, it's like one of my favorite things I've ever seen at CST. And I immediately fell in love with their work and this particular initiative. So working under Deborah, it was kind of like two-part. The first part was we were in season development because it was the summer. And so we were reading tons and tons and tons and tons of plays. And I was specifically focused on reading plays for the upcoming year's Catalyst collaborative projects, which was really interesting because we found ourselves kind of battling between whether we wanted to produce plays about scientists and focus in on the lives of scientists and humanize them in that way, or to produce plays that deal with how science and how technology affects everyday people or affects our relationship with the world and each other. And so those were some of the really interesting conversations that we were having and debating throughout the 6 months that I was there. That was always at the center of our season planning conversations. And what kind of came out of that and was, in development before I came to CST and is continuing to be developed is a project that was commissioned by URT called Young Nerds of Color, which is a interview-based play of over 65 interviews with scientists of color, mostly from the Boston area, many from MIT, Harvard, and this play is being, she would want me to say that it's not being written, but that it's being kind of curated by Melinda Lopez. So throughout my time at CST, I was interviewing people, transcribing people, flagging themes, making these kind of first connections in what was really salient, what needed to be heard, how we wanted to represent these people. And so from that, I became the dramaturg on the project, and we're still working on the project. I think we're in our 4th or 5th year of the interview to drafting to workshopping to production process. And that production is going to be, I believe, premiering at the Science Festival at CST this spring. So that work has been incredibly salient and incredibly worthwhile, and shaped most of my experience at CST and really consumed kind of my work there. And I'll pass it to Erin.
Okay, Erin, same thing. Do you remember the question?
Yes, thank you.
Good, because I can't find it here. Okay, go ahead.
So I work directly under Catherine Carr-Kelly, who is the executive director at Central Square Theater. So whereas Desiree got to work directly under one of the artistic companies, I kind of got to see and experience how a theater functions. I worked closely on budgeting for the upcoming season and a lot of board of directors communications, as well as I got to witness the end of the season planning, which then went through many different iterations, as I think within weeks after we had announced our season, or weeks before we had announced our season, excuse me, we were in lockdown, and it was a huge question of whether or not we were going to be able to produce a season starting in September. And to watch the season go under so many different iterations was very interesting, and certainly not an experience I was expecting from my first co-op. But after March, I was very lucky to be able to be involved in the theater moving forward. We transitioned to several different Zoom plays throughout May and June, some of which we streamed episodically, and then a couple others that we did in a couple different times, just running the full show, streaming live. But the big project that I was lucky to work on was Starlight Square, which was a community-based project in the Central Square area with the Dance Complex, Improv Boston, and Central Square Theater, as well as a few of the churches and places of worship in the Central Square area, where we were able to bring performance and art and community into a socially distanced space.
Oh, I think everybody can start to hear current, very specific recurring themes in what everybody is saying, and would like to go deeper into that, but we got to keep moving forward to get to Metamorphoses, which happens to be, I guess, the next question I was going to ask, and this is for both Des and Erin. So I'll start with Desiree. Why pick this play? And give us a little history, because I know you told me about the history, but bring us up to speed in terms of of the history and how it evolved. And then we'll loop Erin back into that story too. Okay.
And hopefully in about 7 minutes or so we have room for some Q&As from them.
Right.
From people.
Thank you. Timekeeper.
Sure. So 2 years ago, I approached Antonio about directing for the department, and he said, find your top 5 plays, and I read one in parentheses, one play, and it was Metamorphoses, and I said, okay, this is the play. So that's kind of where this journey started. And I remember being really taken by just, I mean, I love adaptations, and I've always loved adaptations, because to me, it's really important to look at how our past affects our future, and our present, and how these stories take on new context in our lives today. I mean, a lot of the play is still really salient, these issues of love and loss and identity and who am I and who are you and who are we in relationship to each other, and how am I perceived by other people, and this deep want to change and to transform is really at the heart of this play. And going into my senior year of college, it's terrifying to think of. I hate change fundamentally, and this play is really kind of about accepting change and moving through these different phases of life, and love, and that's really kind of gripped me about the play. And of course, when thinking about Metamorphoses, you think about Looking Glass, and you think about that first production of it. And of course, those images were really at the forefront of my mind before COVID hit. And just, I was really interested in working through the directorial process in a way that was really focused as well on the design of the play. I've always considered myself a designer first and foremost. And this play offers a really great opportunity for one to focus on kind of both aspects of the production. And I feel like there was a secondary question in there, but now I forget.
Well, I'll segue. It was really to Erin, and since we're running out of time, Erin, let's work on this one with Des together. So you had to take this production that you really didn't intend was going to be virtual and turn it into a virtual production. So what were some of the challenges you found? And I'll start with Des, and then Erin, get ready to jump into your challenges as stage manager. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest challenge, and the question that I think me and Antonio asked each other very frequently was, can we do this in person? And is it possible? Is it attainable? Where are we going to get the pool? All of these questions just kept kind of running through our brain. And kind of the moment that switched everything was deciding finally that we were going to do it almost fully digital. And I mean, the challenges that come with that are so numerous. I mean, the biggest challenge is that we were not made to, or we were not taught to kind of create in distance. And that has been the biggest challenge, surely, at least in terms of being a director, is how can I have these actors, be in community with each other and be in community with the audience when we are several miles away from each other. Some of us are across the country. And so that was a really huge challenge, and something that I think everyone was really gung-ho to tackle straight on. And the other challenge, which Francis, who is on this call, Herbert, who is on this call, can attest to, is how do we get all this stuff to people? And how do we control people's home environments? And how do we get lighting up? And how do we film this? And to all the actors who are on this call from Meta, I mean, it truly could not have been done without the actors' astronomical dedication to the tech, costumes, setup, doing everything every single night. And I mean, that just comes down to, you know, trusting our actors and the training that the department has given them to be able to be co-creators, to be able to be lighting designers within their own home. And that is a huge ask, but also a huge ask of a director and a huge ask of a stage manager to say, yes, I trust you to do this on your own. And I mean, I fundamentally believe that, you know, doing that was the absolute right choice, educationally, for the production, and, you know, for the actors as well.
Erin, you had to make, I would imagine, some major adjustments as you transition to an online format for this production. You want to talk about that for a little bit?
Absolutely. In a funny way, I would say that a lot of the challenges that I experienced throughout a rehearsal process could have easily happened in a physical rehearsal room as well. We were very lucky that we had a very responsive, responsible, and dedicated cast, as Desiree already addressed. But having that trust in them really made that process really smooth. And I think the biggest challenge that I experienced was we only had one day to see each scene the final time. You know, you're in that tech process for 12 hours for both a Saturday and a Sunday and part of a Friday evening, and you're working to make sure that that transition is perfect, and you're working to make sure that they have their costume pieces and they're ready to go and they're on stage, so that you can do it 10 times and hopefully get it perfect or near perfect each of those 10 times. But we truly had those 2 opportunities to see everything all together. The actors only had all of their materials for that 1 week and only really got into their full costumes and had their props for that 1 week. And so to be like, okay, this is what we have, and trusting that we've done everything throughout the process to make it happen was a great challenge, but I think it really paid off.
I hear such incredible statements about adaptability and flexibility and all those things that deal with resilience on multiple levels. I think I remember, Antonio, that you wanted Desiree to introduce what we were going to see. Is this the appropriate time to do that? Because I have one more question if there is.
Yes, I think, but also because of time, I just want to say that we're happy to stay on beyond 7 o'clock. But those of you who have to leave at 7, please free to do so. We won't hold it against you. But before we go into that conversation about what we're about to see, I want to point out something very interesting. There's a number of people here on this call that participated very intentionally in the life of Silver Mask, which I have always said is the best thing that we have in our department. And no, please don't hold it against NU Stage and Shakespeare Society and NU Renaissance and acting out. It's not about that. It's the history of Silver Mask. And I particularly want to point out to Mike Underhill, who, as far as I remember in my own recollection of my history at Northeastern, is the person who really brought Silver Mask into something new and exciting. And so the years that I've been at Northeastern, Silver Mask has been at the forefront of making new things. And that for me has always been the great testament as to what it is that we're teaching our students. And Pablo was president of Silver Mask. And I believe there's Matthew Hoskins, we'll be talking about in a second about Metamorphoses as well. And probably I'm missing a few other people involved in there. Carla was involved, Emma Hunt was involved. And of course, Erin is the current president of Silver Mask. So that adaptability is something that yes, we had to pivot very quickly this year to make these things, but that kind of level of creativity and willingness to lean into curiosity is something that has been fostered for many, many years, and I would even probably say decades, through Silver Mask. So a big shout out to Silver Mask. Yeah, of course, Hannah and Grant and, Mind. But anyway, yes, we had to pivot. And this is not the kind of production that Des first proposed and first we talked about when I was mentoring her. And then Matthew butt in as his double major in computer science and theater and figure out this way of this website through which we're gonna, I don't know how it works. I hope I figure it out. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about what it is that we're trying to see or are hoping to see in episodes and then furthermore.
Is that to me or to Matt?
To the three of you.
Surely. Yeah, so Matt approached me early on in our design process about wanting to be involved, and we kind of danced around it, but knew that we were kind of coming to this idea of an interactive website, mainly because the biggest concern about digital theater, of course, is how do we interact with our audiences, and so this kind of question birthed the website, and I was interested in doing it in episodes because something that I think we've all experienced is this Zoom fatigue, and also the feeling that sometimes when you sit down and watch theater on a screen for an hour, it feels like a movie. But so breaking it up also adds to kind of the accessibility of digital theater, this idea that you can step away, take a break, take care of yourself, and then come back and try and have a connective experience after you watch each episode. So that was central to the creation of it, and I'm gonna send the link and stuff in right now. So you will only have access to episode 1 tonight. Everything else will be streaming on Monday, the 16th. It's 6 parts. They're all about 10 to 20-ish minutes. So nice and bite-sized. But definitely more fun to experience with another person. And there are some elements that we hope kind of give the sense of community as well within the production website itself.
Well, thank you for that. And of course, a big shout out to Oliver, who designed the sets, lines, and production, and of course to the incomparable Francis Nelson McSherry. Talk about adaptability and changing one way of doing things. Can't wait to see what you came up with, my dear Francis. So we're now at 7 o'clock, but as I said before, we're happy to stay on, but just to acknowledge Nancy, and just to remind everybody, Nancy is now Professor Emerita of the department. So she has not stepped down from anything. She's just kind of stepped aside. And thanks to Zoom, we can Zoom her in anytime. A little Nancy Kindelan goes really well on a Friday night.
It was great to see you all. I did the whole scan of people's faces. I wish I could touch base with all of you. You know, you get to talk to each other. I don't have that luxury, and I miss you very much. But I take a great deal of joy listening to what you have to say and where you are in your lives and where you want to go. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Always a pleasure to see you. And thank you, Pablo, and Des, and Erin. And some of you had sent some questions about what we're doing in the department and things like that. So I'm happy to stay on and chat a bit more. But if you have to leave, please feel free to do so. We'll take a moment to acknowledge that, and then we can say for a little bit more. David Blake, oh my gosh, David used to do the posters for us when I first came to Northeastern. Nice to see you. And Nick Osborne, look at that. He looks like an adult. Amazing. Anyway, oh my gosh, Flores! My gosh, yeah. Everything fell off. Was this too much? What an amazing community we are. I have to say that. So what were the questions that some people have sent in?
I can answer them, Pablo.
Thank you, Diana.
Right. But first, let me start with a question that actually popped up in the chat by Mike Underhill. How can the current and former leaders of theater institutions, predominantly white males, create a smooth transition to the next generation of leadership that reflects the makeup of our country? Are there precedents within our industry or others that can serve as models for best practices in this moment of inflection? or theater as a whole?
Really, Michael? Was that?
I'll also say Nancy, Des, Erin, Pablo, please feel free to join in and answer the question too.
You have to repeat that for me.
Well, how can the current and former leaders of theater institutions, predominantly white males, create a smooth transition to the next generation of leadership that reflects the makeup of our country? Well, clearly by figuring out a way to solve this riddle of white supremacy in the academy and in the professional theater, in the academic theater, and make sure that everything that we do is intentionally anti-racist and contributes to everybody being fully human as possible. And for that, we need to apologize to all the people that we have harmed. And I think that we all have to take a sort of a Hippocratic oaths to do no more harm and get better at it, and there's, as you know, Michael, there's a number of wonderful resources happening throughout the country right now and internationally as well in how to be intentionally anti-racist. And we're doing a lot of that in the department. I'm doing a lot of that as the leader of the department myself as well. And that's how we, create a new world. Are there precedents within our industry or others that can serve as models for best practices in this moment of inflection for theater as a whole? Yes, I mean, as I said, there's lots of interesting. I will share, I just finished a 2-day training with Art Equity that I highly recommend to all of you. For many of you, you have come across the name of Nicole Brewer and Black Acting Methods by Sharon Lockett as well. So there's a lot of resources, and within within Boston, there's the Anti-Racist Collaborative Project that is working a lot with Stage Source, and we have a co-op student now working with Stage Source and collaborating with this. And here on the call is also Maren Flessen, who's representing the Reground Theater Collective, which is an amazing theater initiative for college students that was started a couple of years ago by one of our students, Tiffany, and who many of you have collaborated with, including Des. And Maren is also helping me. We just established a coalition of chairs and directors of theater programs in the greater Boston area, all the universities, private, public, big, small, all sizes, to start through Stage Source designing a decolonizing theater series, programming series that would include a variety of different aspects, both workshops, plenary sessions, conversations, sessions specifically for chairs so that we can do better work as leaders with more intentionality. So we're moving and shaking.
I'll go for it.
No, you go.
You got it, Des.
Okay. So I'm the producing artistic director at Reground Theater Collective currently, and I think one of the big things that we're taking away from this period of reflection is reorganizing our own institution in order to create a more equity across within our leadership overall, within our organization, and within the opportunities that we're giving to people, and how we're training artists in order to be ethical, responsible, and empathetic members of our community. And I think that a huge task for every theater organization is re-identifying their organizational structure. I think that is fundamental to how we move forward in this idea of anti-racist work, in this idea of decolonization, and how who is in power will always fundamentally decide how a company runs and who a company works with and what kind of productions a company does. And so a big part of that is decentralizing power from a single person as the producing artistic director. That's not an easy thing to do, obviously, but it's a responsible thing to do. But that also comes down to, taking down hierarchies within the rehearsal room as well. And changing the way that we imagine our production calendars, and changing how we view art and its importance to our lives, and how that balances within our work lives, within our artistic lives, within our social lives. So how do we prepare the next generation of leaders? I think by leading by example, and not saying that things will change when new people come in. Things have to change now in order to let those people in. You can't walk through a door unless it's unlocked. And so that's vital, I think, to kind of creating this new generation of theater and theater artists.
One thing that I would say that I've noticed in the last 25 years, 30 years of sitting around and listening to students talk is that the level of being articulate has jumped huge percentage points. And you can give it words if you like. And Pablo talked about being intentional. Des talked about being intentional. Antonio talked about being intentional. But the thing that I've heard over and over again tonight is a real identification of the questions. And the questions are now being put on the table. And the questions are being put on the table, and you're coming to the table. And I can tell you that that always wasn't the case. So I take that as a real kind of optimistic look at what possibly can be in the future, because that's where it all begins. Identifying the problems, putting them down, standing behind them, and getting moving and working on them. I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you before, didn't I?
No, all good, all good. I agree with you, Nancy, and I really agree with what you were saying, Des. And hi, Mike. It's good to see you. I like your jacket. But I was gonna say that I truly agreeing with Des that representation in and of itself is not change. It's not necessarily change. And I think my internet connection might be a little choppy. Hope you can hear me okay. I'm going to turn my camera off so you can hear my voice better.
Yeah, that's because you sound a little bit drunk.
The idea that we need to change the structure, I completely agree with. And good, am I sober now? Am I sobering up?
A little bit. Why don't we come back to you, Pablo, in a little bit. Diana, were there any other questions that were put before?
Yeah, not in the chat, but from the registration form. I'm going to try to smush a few together, if that's okay.
Yeah,
with
because
you.
we probably have time for maybe 2 questions or so.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So what have been the benefits of having virtual theater? And are you guys planning on continuing this post the pandemic?
The benefits.
I can speak on that if you.
Max, Max, come.
Hi, Max. Wow, you're running 11 minutes late.
I know, more because people want to talk more.
So the benefits of digital theater. I mean, the biggest benefit that I have seen is accessibility. And to me, accessibility is a huge issue in the theater industry, not only financial accessibility, but in terms of our spaces accessible. Is the work itself accessible? And there are definitely theaters that are prioritizing accessibility in terms of ticketing, in terms of accessibility needs for audience members, but in a digital space, the audience becomes responsible and capable to take care of any accessibility needs that they have, as well as digital theater is a lot cheaper to produce, which takes a huge chunk of the financial responsibility from audience members in order to, you know, that paywall is not as significant. And you also don't have to worry about, you know, how do I get to the theater? How far away is the theater? Is the theater in a place where I don't feel comfortable? These are the important things that I think, you know, our in-person theater locations need to address, but digital theater, you know, in some ways reigns supreme in that regard, minus the, you know, huge pay gap of having a computer and having internet access. But I also, again, I work with Reground Theater Collective, and we usually do a festival in the spring of just Boston students, Boston intercollegiate students. And this year we were able to kind of open that up to students and emerging artists from across the country, which is something we never would have been able to do in person. So being able to, you know, connect with artists from anywhere and everywhere is really, really huge. And be able to connect with audiences from everywhere and anywhere is incredibly huge as well. So those are some of the benefits that I've seen.
Thank you, Des, for saying all of that. And yes, we intend to continue this whenever the pandemic changes to the next chapter. I really don't think that we're going to go back. But when we continue to look forward at what we do as a production program in our department, we certainly will kind of embrace these things. There's a lot of inequities that were happening beforehand that we were recreating in the department. So for example, on one level, we're asking our students to consider more interdisciplinary connections and more interdisciplinary projects, which is great. And some of them are doing amazing things. And at the same time, we're asking them to participate in a production program that operates in similar fashion to the professional theater, which is an incredible, huge commitment of time and energy, and 10 out of 12 texts and things like that. I think that we need to revisit that a bit more and do probably shorter, smaller scope adventures or investigations, and also continue the collaborations that we have fostered with our colleagues in the Media and Screen Studies program and in the Department of Art and Design with game design, interaction design, experience design, so that there is an easier segue towards theater and technology, which your generation and this generation is going to be very invested in, and we need to prepare you for that as well.
Something that's kind of very selfish as a response is creating theater in your home, I think allows you to be a lot more comfortable in a very strange way. And I think something that Desiree did that I really admired from the very beginning was setting a very level playing field across everyone who was in the room. And they touched on this previously when answering the question, but recognizing that Zoom fatigue is very real and that all of the folks participating in this production were students or are students and were on Zooms for more than half of their day, and to ask them to be on Zoom for three additional hours was a huge ask. And through that process, I think Desiree and I were extremely forgiving and understanding, not only of our cast, but also of ourselves, when we were like, we need a break. Like, and I think that that is something that we should really take into, is just checking in more frequently throughout a rehearsal process, not just within the rehearsal room itself. But bye, Max. Excuse me, I lost my train of thought. But recognizing that people have limits, and I thought Desiree did an incredible job of recognizing those limits for everyone involved.
So maybe one more question. Diana? Or anybody?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Well, let me leave with one last remaining question is, what do we see the future of theater as now with this whole pandemic and virtual elements coming in? How do we see it completely changing?
Well, I would like to circle back to Nancy's quote of John Steinbeck. You know, it will continue to keep dying. and will be continue to be reinvented. We're in the middle of it. It's, you know, it's hard to know what the future will bring. I have some hopes that the future will be more just, more equitable, more sustainable, more inclusive, and that so many of the structures that we have held dear for so many decades and centuries can begin to morph and to shift and to change. For example, the notion, particularly in the academic theater, that the faculty know better than everybody else, that we are the quote unquote experts. We are really literally in a position of being co-learners with our students. I mean, Matthew has explained to me this website several times and I still do not understand it. Zoom continues to be a big learning curve for me, and I just started teaching it in March. So that notion that there is the experts in the academy who are going to know versus the people who are learning it, I think that that power is going to be equalized, and I think that's going to be manifested in how we make theater. But I think that, as Pablo said earlier, I think that as long as we're able to gather, and this is a gathering, it's delightful on many levels. It's lovely to see so many of you, and it's incredibly frustrating not to be able to do this with some cheese and crackers and a nice hug and things like that. But eventually, I think that part will come back, even with a mask or something. But we'll continue to gather, and we will continue to tell stories. I mean, we've just been telling you some stories tonight about these productions and these works that these wonderful people are doing. So I think that part is not going to die ever, but it will change. And the department and the university will continue to morph, will continue to adjust and to recalibrate. And you're part of it, for better or for worse. You're part of our community. You will always be part of our community, and you're always welcome. Mi casa es su casa, es nuestra casa. You're welcome to come, and it's really nice to see you. So a big thank you for joining us tonight. Big thanks to Nancy and to Diana and Chris and Molly for setting this up, Herbert and Marty, who was not able to join us tonight, and all of you wonderful people. And huge congratulations to Des and Erin and Matthew and Francis and Oliver and all the people involved and all the cast of Metamorphoses. Can't wait to see it. Max can see it, right? There's not gonna be like any weird things, right? And now we should just have some wine and crackers. No? I don't have to say goodbye. This is so ridiculous. How do we say goodbye? Nancy, you're muted. Say something wise. How do we say goodbye?
No, do we watch this episode now? Can we do that now?
You can do that now.
Oh, okay.
The link is in the chat,
Okay.
as well as the password to get in.
Okay, I didn't get a chance to say hello to everyone who was out there. Hello, if you haven't already left. And thank you to everybody. And I'm going to go to the thing now, right? So I'm going to buy.
We're going to go to the thing now. I think that's
Right.
good. Goodbye, everybody.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. The streaming link has been shared as well as the password. We also recommend that you guys register for the Scenes for Metamorphosis streaming period so that you'll continue to get their lovely reminders when the episodes are fully uploaded. And again, thank you so much to Pablo, Des, Erin. I know that senior year is not fun right now, or school is not fun right now, but you truly showed your resilience tonight. And thank you again to Nancy and Antonio for a wonderful evening.
Good to see everybody.